Cimoooooooo! What's going on, guys? It's Cimoooooooo, and oh boy, do the Master Rule 5 changes keep on coming, because today I'm bringing to you a video on some new rule changes that the OCG is going to be experiencing once April 1st rolls around. Now, I will start off by saying I don't know how this is going to affect the TCG, so bear in mind these are OCG changes only, but some of these changes are actually for the better of the game, in my personal opinion. Some of the changes actually align with North American TCG rulings, which are very interesting. So I'm curious to see that when the TCG rulings come around, if we get something similar to this, if it's going to be the same for us as it currently is in the OCG. So I thought I'd go ahead and share that with you guys today. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. So the first thing I wanted to discuss was right here over on YG Organization. Again, like I said, these are going to be starting on April 1st, 2020, and the first ruling is in regards to activation of monster effects for monsters returned to the deck and or the extra deck face down. So what they're talking about here is, unless it is specifically referenced in the text, monsters that are returned to the deck and the extra deck face down cannot activate their effects. This includes mandatory effects. So the example they give is with Elemental Hero Absolute Zero, which I know none of us enjoy playing against. So the old way is, if Ab Zero is returned to the extra deck by compulsory evacuation device, its effect to destroy all monsters your opponent controls will activate. The new way it's ruled is that if Ab Zero is returned to the extra deck by compulse, its effect to destroy all monsters your opponent controls will not activate. And I really like this because I think it's kind of BS that a card that returns face down to the extra deck or gets shuffled back into the main deck could still activate, even though like it's not even on the field anymore. It's shuffled into the deck or just placed into the extra deck face down. To me, that didn't make much sense, and it kind of didn't really give a lot of counterplay to cards like Ab Zero specifically, because you kind of just had to find a way to eat the board wipe and then play through it. It was really annoying. Another popular example is a card like Curious. Curious is used in a lot of decks that are just trying to turbo into the graveyard. Curious has the ability to add a card from your graveyard to your hand when it leaves the field, so that would also still trigger. So I'm assuming that would apply to that card as well. And again, I just like that there's actually, you know, some counterplay to these cards now if you have specific cards that would like bounce them back to the extra deck, just as an example. So I think that's a cool change. The next ruling is in regards to activation of card effects that move away from their activation location before their effects activated. So if you guys know where this is going already, North America pretty much already abides by this, but the OCG is going to be following in line, and this is interesting. So in the card text, cards refer to their activation requirement as well as their effect activation location. For example, if it is an effect that activates where the monster itself is normal summoned, it activates on the field. If it's a trap card whose effect is activated if it's sent to the graveyard, it activates in the graveyard. If a card moves location from its activation location to a different location before its effect is activated, its effects cannot be activated, including mandatory effects. So the example they give here is that if you tribute Sangan for Crush Card Virus, so the cost is tributing off Sangan for before Crush Card would fully resolve. But as Chainlink 2, DD Crow gets activated to banish the Sangan from the graveyard. Now, how this would work is the effect after the chain is done resolving, so DD Crow would banish Sangan, Crush Card would resolve. Now we'd be in a new chain link. For the OCG, Sangan would still trigger. However, the new way they're ruling it is that if Sangan's triggered for Crush Card and then you have DD Crow banishing it, Sangan does not activate. And I think this is really good. Again, I think this is actually a positive change. The reason I say that is because it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense if the card does leave its zone when it's going to be activating. Some people could argue that the other way as well, but I actually do kind of like the fact that it has to stay in its specific location if it wants to activate. Another example of this would be something like, let's say, Call the Haunted on Satellar Knight Deneb is Chainlink 1, and then Mystical Space Typhoon would be Chainlink 1, and then Call the Haunted target Deneb would be Chainlink 2. So the chain will resolve, Deneb would special summon, Mystical Space Typhoon would destroy Call the Haunted. Deneb would be destroyed because Call the Haunted would no longer be on the field, and in the OCG, Deneb would actually trigger, which is a little bit weird, but now, you know, by TCG NA rulings, it wouldn't trigger. And so now for the OCG, it also will not trigger anymore either. I think I'm actually okay with that. So just, yeah, bear in mind, we're pretty much, if you're already in TCG North America, this isn't really anything new, but this is big because not only does the OCG abide by the old rule, TCG Europe also abides by that rule as well, so that is going to be a little bit different. again, these aren't the biggest of changes. They're pretty marginal depending on the context, but they can be make or break depending on what kind of deck you're playing or depending on just how a match may go. So the third ruling is regarding the normal summon or special summon of a monster in relation to card effects that mention during the turn you activate this card or effect. So this is any cards, like let's say, well, let's just go ahead and get to the card, what it says here first. So some cards will have text such as, during the turn you activate this effect, you cannot special summon monsters except blank monsters, blank being anything it's relating to, or during the turn you activate this card, you cannot summon monsters except with this card's effect, which have activation requirements for whether or not you summon certain monsters during this turn. Cards with this text will now check whether or not the summoning of the monster described in the text was successful for their activation requirements. So what I like about this is that it seems to be that they're moving away from attempted summon attempts. So just as an example, like let's say something like Card of Demise or Pot of Duality, both of these have the restrictions that you can't special summon in the same turn that you activate them. However, if you attempt to special summon a monster, and let's say that summon gets negated by an opponent's card effect, you then are allowed to activate Card of Demise under this new rule, because since the summon was negated, it doesn't matter that you attempted the summon, but because it wasn't successful, it doesn't count against you if it doesn't work. And honestly, I like this change a lot as well, because I think it was really weird for newer players especially, having to learn about like attempting to special summon. It was kind of like one of those like unwritten rules of Yu-Gi-Oh that as you just learn to play the game, you kind of just had to get accustomed to. But I like it now. It just makes more logical sense from a literacy standpoint. But I mean, it is what it is. Just bear in mind that, you know, when you're going up against anyone playing Demise decks or Duality decks, that if you negate those summons, they are now free to activate those cards like Duality, Demise, and so on. So the fourth new ruling is regarding the special summoning of monsters that mention they can only be special summoned once per turn. And this is probably one of the biggest changes out of all the rulings we're going to be discussing here. Maybe the biggest, actually. I mean, the third one's pretty big too, but this one's also pretty big. So certain cards have the text, you can only special summon blank once per turn, being whatever the monster is, which means that you can only special summon cards with that name one time during this entire turn. Cards with this text will now only count for the summoning if the summoning of a monster with that name was successful during this turn. So the example is the old way: if High Speed Roy Chambara gets negated by Judgment, you can't attempt to special summon another one because Chambara states you can only special summon one Chambara per turn. However, the new way it's worded is that, the new way it's ruled is that since the summon was negated, you can summon another one. And I think this is incredible because this changes a lot, right? This makes it so that Sky Striker monsters, if their summons get negated, that you can summon out multiple copies. So like say Kagari, that just went back to 3 on the most recent ban list, so like that could be a big deal. Servant of Endymion, that card had a lot of confusion around it with like if its effect got hit by Ash Blossom, but now you're going to be able to summon that out if the effect gets negated. You can use it again since the effect wasn't successful, so that clears up that ruling a lot. There's also stuff like Dingirsu. Dingirsu has a limitation that it can only be special summoned once per turn, but if that summon attempt gets negated, you can slap down another one. So a lot of decks that have cards that specifically say they can only be special summoned once per turn get a boost out of this. There are some other cards that are more generic that get some boost out of this as well, but I mean, this is a really big change, and again, I really like this, I think, just because, again, it kind of just makes sense that if the summon was negated, you should still be able to summon one because you never technically summoned it in the first place. Just alleviating that whole attempted summon thing, I just think that's the better way to go, so I like it. And then the last ruling, this one is very, very niche, so it depends, but it is relevant in some instances, regards continuous trap cards that special summon themselves to a monster zone by their own effects. So continuous trap cards such as Embodiment of Apopus, which have the effect to special summon this card as a normal monster, it's also still treated as a trap that can special summon themselves to the monster zone, will now free up spell and trap zone they were placed in before. So for those of you guys who don't know, trap monsters, when they're placed in the spell and trap zone, even when they are flipped face up and are now a monster on the field, they still technically occupy the zone that they were activated from in the first place. So what this is doing now is that it's actually freeing up those zones. So for instance, if you're playing something like Embodiment of Apopus, or I guess like Shaddoll Core, that might be a more modern example because Shaddolls do play Core. If you're playing Shaddoll Core and actually use the effect to summon it out to the field, which can happen sometimes, you are then able to free up that spell and trap zone, so you're not hindered by the fact you're playing those trap monsters. Now again, this is very, very niche and really doesn't affect a lot of decks. However, we are getting the new Eldritch archetype in Secret Slayers at the beginning of April, and that is a trap monster based deck. So what's neat is that all those trap monsters now, when they're in the main monster zone, are going to free up their respective spell and trap zone. So you could have like 4 trap monsters on the field and still have 5 back row if you want to in an extreme example. But I think that's a good thing. Again, it's taking away a lot of things that just on the surface don't make a lot of sense, especially to a newer player or someone who's just getting into the game, because the cards don't specify these types of things, right? A lot of it is either implied or learned just based off of how the way things have been ruled. And I think overall moving forward, a lot of these changes are really good. Now, you guys could obviously disagree, but I'd love to hear what you guys think down in the comments below. Guys, thank you guys so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always. Subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. And if you found this video informative, consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member. Just by showing your support in any way that you can, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.